The subject we are going to discuss today is why is the Bhagavad Gita difficult? When we accept that the Bhagavad Gita is the one book that unites all people on the subcontinent, all astikas, all people who believe in God, then the question arises that if it's such a wonderful book, why is it that people have difficulty in understanding? So we must go into the depths of Bhagavad Gita and we must understand why current prevailing situation and circumstances and the current explanations on Bhagavad Gita make it impossible to understand. So first and foremost, the Bhagavad Gita is spoken way back in time. And it's spoken way back in time because there are very few records of the earliest versions of the Bhagavad Gita. And until Adi Shankara Acharya took up his version of the Bhagavad Gita, there was absolutely not much known about the Bhagavad Gita, at least to the common English speaking person and the common man. But the Bhagavad Gita, despite being so far back in time, it must have, while the dating of the Bhagavad Gita is still argued about, some people say it is 5,000 years ago, but there are people who date it back as far as 699 BCE, which is nearly 700 years ago. And because of that, the scripture is difficult to get hold of and grasp and see other views and commentaries on, most of which have now which are no longer available. Second is that Bhagavad Gita is in Sanskrit. And not only is it in Sanskrit, but it is argued that it is in a type of Sanskrit which is pre-Panini. Panini gave a structure and form to Sanskrit. And if you go anywhere to learn Sanskrit, that's what you will be taught. You will be taught Panini grammar. But although you will be taught Panini grammar and most books after, most scriptures available after Panini's elucidation of Sanskrit grammar and structure are available in a particular format. The Bhagavad Gita, it is said, predates it. And because it predates the Panini system of grammar, most people who write commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita work with a Sanskrit editor. And when they speak with the Sanskrit or when they write with the Sanskrit editor, the Sanskrit editor who tries to translate the Bhagavad Gita translates the Bhagavad Gita based upon his knowledge of Sanskrit, which is post-Panini. So therefore, it is a little difficult to get the true meaning. The third reason why Bhagavad Gita is difficult to understand is that the words and the meanings of Bhagavad Gita vary according to the context. This is very important. There's a whole book on how Sanskrit words vary according to the context. And simply by the study of the Upanishads, it has been pointed out that from the earliest Upanishads, the word Atman meant breath. And gradually the word Atman evolved to mean many things. So Atman could mean self, it could mean body, Atman could mean mind, Atman could mean soul, Atman could mean super soul. So when you are translating a book like Bhagavad Gita, if you do not have adequate understanding of what the text is trying to say, you find it very difficult to bring out the true meaning. And therefore, I hope I am not trying to discourage people who are learning Sanskrit, but many people learn Sanskrit for the sake of studying Bhagavad Gita. They say, I'm studying Sanskrit so I can learn Bhagavad Gita. Well, I just want to warn you that what you may understand from your knowledge or your study of Bhagavad Gita may not actually give you what you're looking for. The knowledge of the context of the Bhagavad Gita is more important than your actual understanding of the Sanskrit language post-Panini. So therefore, if you are trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita, you need to see the Bhagavad Gita in the context. In the context means what I discussed with you in the last session. You have to understand what is Sankhya philosophy. You have to understand what is Yajnavalkya's yoga philosophy, not Patanjali, because Patanjali is again post-Bhagavad Gita. So you have to know what Karma Mimamsa is about. So you have to know all these philosophies, these 6 philosophies that are actually contained within the Bhagavad Gita. You have to have some understanding of these philosophies, because if you don't have an understanding of these philosophies, you will never understand Bhagavad Gita. The other problem with understanding Bhagavad Gita is that Bhagavad Gita is taught to most of us, let's say all of us maybe, by people who have renounced the world, whether they wear orange robes or they don't wear orange robes. The fact is they have renounced the world. And if they have renounced the world, then the life that they're leading is contrary to the message of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita clearly states that Sanyasastu Mahabhavo Dukkham Aptum Yogatah, that those who renounce the world without having attained union with God get only sorrow. Yoga Yukta Munir Brahman na Chirena Adi Gachati. But those who work in a spirit of devotion and renunciation, they attain the supreme without delay. And repeatedly throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna points out that doing your duty, fulfilling your responsibilities towards your family, towards society, towards your nation is far, far more, is far, far superior to attempting to renounce the world externally. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita foreshadows the renunciation of so many kings that followed the Bhagavad Gita, or followed the time of the Bhagavad Gita. For example, Buddha gave up his kingdom, and surely he went through the same queries and questions that went through the mind of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, but he did not have Krishna by his side. Similarly, Mahavir also went through the same queries and questions and fears that went through the mind of Arjun in the Bhagavad Gita. And because they were many years ahead of his time. Surely Bhagavad Gita was there for him to be able to understand that he was making a mistake, just like the Buddha. But unfortunately, neither of them followed the Bhagavad Gita. So Bhagavad Gita is not about external renunciation. And yet, tragically, you are trying to learn Bhagavad Gita from people who have renounced the world. Look at the books you read and the authors, all of them in orange robe. Look at the people who teach you Bhagavad Gita and see that all of them have renounced the world, orange robes and all. So therefore, you should understand that a person who is not following the book that they are teaching cannot be a suitable teacher for you. It's like going to a die-hard communist who's lived his life as a communist and a communist activist. And then you go to him and tell him, can you explain to me what capitalism is? Did anyone go to Jyoti Basu and ask him how to learn capitalism from him? Is it possible for you to learn philosophy or instruction on a text when the person who is speaking and guiding you is himself not following the text? So this is the next problem. Yet another problem that lies in the Bhagavad Gita is that when you start studying Bhagavad Gita, instead of people who are true researchers and who are trying to elucidate the true meaning of the Bhagavad Gita and what Krishna was trying to say at that time, you are directed to people who are trying to propagate their own philosophies through the mouth of Krishna. So in actual fact, there is something which is known as the Prasthanatrayi. Somewhere along the way, people found that if you want to write or start any philosophy based on Vedanta of whatever ilk, then you had to give your own interpretation of one, the Upanishads, two, the Brahma Sutra, and three, the Bhagavad Gita. And thus, everyone who was keen on starting their own sampradaya, everyone who was keen on starting their own lineage, everyone who was keen on starting their own school of philosophy, everyone who wanted to become famous and establish themselves as a scholar and a saint, they wrote interpretations of this Prastantrai. Some did not speak on all, did not write on all the three, but definitely all of them spoke and wrote on Bhagavad Gita. And of course, the first of them was the venerable and notable Adi Shankaracharya. Now, Adi Shankaracharya and many of the people who follow in his footsteps, especially the people whom I call the Neo-Advaitins. Neo-Advaitin means those who have only today learned Advaita. They have their own versions of the Bhagavad Gita. And if you listen to their Bhagavad Gita, the first thing they do is destroy the concept of Krishna. They will say, let me teach you Bhagavad Gita, I am the expert. because I know Sanskrit and I have read the Upanishads and I have read the Brahma Sutra and I have been taught by other experts similarly like me. So let me teach you what Bhagavad Gita is all about. And this Bhagavad Gita, whose title itself means Song of God, it means Song of God. And somewhere they want to take out God and they want to make it the song. And they take out God from the picture. They take God out from the picture by saying that Krishna is just an ordinary man who has attained divinity. Just like anybody can if they want. For example, they'll tell you, I have become like Krishna. And you can also become like Krishna. Though you are not like Krishna now, it will take you some time. But I have become like Krishna. You will take some time to become like Krishna. So Krishna is an ordinary man who has attained divinity. Another way they will speak and try to destroy Krishna is by saying that Krishna is human and it is God who has come, or it is divinity, which includes you, by the way, is manifesting through him. So for such people, the Bhagavad Gita has its reply. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks of these individuals who destroy the concept of Krishna as God. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 11, Krishna says, Avajananti mama mudha manushim tanumashritam param bhava majanantam mama bhuta maheshwaram. So Krishna says, when I come in my personal form, foolish, deluded people who are in illusion are unable to recognize me. They do not know that I am divine and I am the supreme Lord of all beings. So this is so important to understand. And what happens to these people who deny God? Krishna promises them frustration. He promises them frustration in their actions in the world. He promises them frustrations in their spiritual life. And he guarantees that their efforts will all meet with destruction. In the very next verse, Bhagavad Gita 9.12, Krishna says, Mogha Asha Mogha Karmanu Mogha Jnana Vichetasaha Rakshasim Asuram Chaiva Prakritim Mohanim Ashritaha. So bewildered by my prakriti or material energy, such persons embrace demonical and atheistical views. In that deluded state, their hopes for welfare, their hopes for fruitive actions are all wasted and their culture of knowledge is back. So I'd like you to understand this very important point, that if you follow this philosophy, which is called Advaita, the new Advaita philosophy, you are trying to worship the inconceivable and replace that, or replace Krishna with that. In the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is asked by Arjuna, which is better? Is it better to worship you in the form of Krishna, or is it better to worship you in the form of the impersonal, absolute, inconceivable. Which is better? And Krishna answers him and says, but let me give you the Sanskrit first. Arjuni Uvacha in 12.1. Evam satata yukta ye bhakta svam paripasate ye chapya aksharam avyaktam tesham ke yoga vittamaha. Which is considered to be more perfect? Those who are properly engaged in your bhakti, your devotion, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifest, inconceivable. And then Krishna in 12.2 answers him and says, Maya Veshya Manoya Mam, Sri Bhagavanu Vacha, 12.2. Sri Bhagavanu Vacha, Maya Veshya Manoya Mam Nitya Yukta Upasate Shraddhaya Parayopetas Te Me Yuktatmo Mataha. He whose mind is fixed on my personal form, always engaging in worshipping me with great and transcendental faith, is considered by me to be the most perfect. And yet, he goes on to state in text 5 of chapter 12 that those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested, impersonal, inconceivable, non-manifest Brahman, for them, progress is very troublesome and full of difficulties and sorrow. To move ahead in that field on that path is very difficult for those who are themselves occupying a body. Klesho diktarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukham dehavad viravapyate. So, not only does Krishna say that you should worship him in form as Krishna, but he also goes so far as to say that if you worship him without form and you're attached to that form of worship, your advancement will be very troublesome. And to make progress in that discipline is always very difficult. So people often ask me, that bewildered by material energy, people embrace demonic and atheistical views in 9.12. Mogasha mog karmano mog jnana vichetasah rakshasim asurim chaiva prakritim mohinam ashrita. Why is it that people who deny Krishna is God, why is it that such people move towards demonic and atheistical paths? And therefore, I must take you to the Padma Puran. And in the Padma Puran, actually in several Puranas, there is there is Shiva who speaks to Parvati. And Lord Shiva, in speaking to Parvati in chapter 236 of the Padma Puran, Uttarakhanda, he says, Mayavadam asat shastram prachanam baudam uchyate mayaiva kalpite devi kalau brahmana rupinaha. Mayavad or Advaita philosophy is an impious, wicked belief and against all conclusions of the Vedas. It is only veiled Buddhism, my dear Parvati. In Kali Yuga, I assume the form of a Brahmana, Adi Shankara, to teach this imagined philosophy. He goes on to say Mayavadam asat shastram prachanam baudam uchyate. Why does he call it Mayavad? He calls it Mayavad because you say that you are God, and then you say that Maya has covered you with illusion. So who is more powerful, God or illusion? If you are God and illusion has covered you, Maya has covered your perceptive powers, then surely Maya is more powerful than God. Therefore, that path is called Mayavad philosophy. Soon after that, in the Padma Puran, he says, Apartham Shruti Vakyanam Darshayam Loka Garhitam Swakarma Rupa Tyajya Tvam Atraiva Pratipadyate Sarva Karma Paribhrashtair Vaidharmam Tvam Tad Uchyate Paresh Jiva Parekyam Maya Tu Pratipadyate. This Mayavad Advaita philosophy, preached by me in the form of Adi Shankara, deprives the words of the holy texts of their actual meaning and is thus condemned in the world. It recommends the renunciation of one's duties, since those who have fallen from their duties say, I am giving up the duties, that is, a religious life. In this way, they also falsely propounded the identity of the Supreme Lord as being the same as the individual soul. Brahmanas chaparam rupam nirgunam vakshate maya sarvaswam jagato apiyasya mohanartham kalau yuge. This is Padma Puran 6.236.10. In order to bewilder the atheists in Kali Yuga, I describe the personal form of the Lord Krishna to be without any form and without any qualities. So he says, and he goes on. There are many, many verses which I will not go into. But basically, he's saying that those people who say that Krishna is not God and who say that the impersonal absolute is God and is superior to Krishna are actually being misled. And they're being misled because Lord Shiva himself came to preach that philosophy in the form of veiled Buddhism. Why do we say veiled Buddhism? Because Buddhism states that there is nothing. It is a nihilistic philosophy. There is nothing, there is no soul and there is no God. And what does Advaita philosophy say? Advaita philosophy also says that Brahman is nothing. Because it is nothing material, you can't speak of it, you can't describe it, you can't have anything to do with it. Therefore, for all practical purposes, it is nothing. So, it's important for us to understand that following various acharyas who are trying to propound their philosophies through the mouth of Krishna by using the instrument of the Bhagavad Gita will not take you towards understanding the Bhagavad Gita by itself. If you're serious about learning and teaching Bhagavad Gita, you must read their philosophies because you should be familiar with what they say. And you should also study the analysis of the Bhagavad Gita by scholars. And if you read that, both the interpretations of Bhagavad Gita, you will get a clearer understanding of what the Bhagavad Gita is all about. So you have to understand that the Bhagavad Gita is a very unique book. The language makes it very difficult to understand. You see, even Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana, was not popular to the extent it has become today. But how did it become popular? Because it was brought into a modern day local language through the form of Ramcharitmanas. And when it came through the form of Ramcharitmanas, everybody began to follow Ramayana. So Bhagavad Gita is unique because it unites all philosophies that are Ashtikya and all the six darshanas of the Vedas. It is a polemical work that argues against atheistical philosophies, which are called Shramana philosophies, which today survive as Buddhism and Jainism. And yet it is difficult to understand because the Sanskrit is a very ancient form of Sanskrit. Before modern Sanskrit developed its language, grammar, and structure by the grace of Panini. And because you are being taught by people who are living their lives contrary to the Bhagavad Gita, you are being taught by people who are acting contrary to the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita wants to take sannyas. He wants to renounce the world. He says, why can't I live by begging instead of being a prince? And the whole Bhagavad Gita has to tell him why he should not renounce the world. And then you are listening to Bhagavad Gita from someone who has renounced the world. Go and look in the mirror and you will understand what it means. When Krishna is spending whole Bhagavad Gita telling you to give up the idea of renunciation and to do your duty, you are learning Bhagavad Gita from people who have already done that. So these are some of the obstacles to learning Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is Song of God. It is about God giving the message to his devotee who has gone astray because he has listened to other philosophies. Therefore, Krishna tells him, Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam varja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishami ma. He says, abandon all other varieties of religion, all other scriptures, all other philosophies, all other ridiculous theories of the law of karma. And he says, follow what I tell you and I will save you from all sin. So Bhagavad Gita is a Vaishnav text. It is actually an elaboration of what is considered the Narayaniya faith or the Narayaniya philosophy and faith, which is in the earlier part of the Bhagavad Gita. But in truth, the fact is that people who try to remove Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita are the absolute, doing the absolute opposite of what Krishna would want you to do. So this is also a point to be noted. So if you study the Bhagavad Gita with sincerity, with faith, with understanding, the Bhagavad Gita is has got layered philosophies. For example, the bulk of the Bhagavad Gita is about Sankhya philosophy, but it is layered and it is subsumed and it is consumed by Vedanta. So Vedanta is considered supreme. But the whole book is not Vedanta. So these are things you will not learn easily from people who are teaching pure Vedanta. You have to understand that real understanding of the philosophy comes from genuine study of the Bhagavad Gita. So you can get a clearer understanding of the Bhagavad Gita by following these guidelines. So I will pause here. If you have any queries, questions, comments, please go ahead and ask.
Thank you, Shantanu-ji. It was a very interesting session. Um, so one question that most of us have is that when is the right time to when one should start reading the Bhagavad Gita? Because most people, they generally are interested towards religion or taking up religious scriptures later in their life. Maybe, when they have experienced a lot in their life and then they would bring it up. But do you think there is a certain point in one's life when, or a certain time or age when people should start reading the Bhagavad Gita?
See, there's a story of an archer who was shooting arrows through his bow. But he was not shooting at targets. He would first shoot the arrow and then he would draw the target around it so that the arrow appeared to be in the center. So this is ridiculous. You cannot live your life and then study Bhagavad. Of course, it's never too late to study Bhagavad Gita, and it's better late than never to study Bhagavad Gita. But the earlier you learn Bhagavad Gita, the better it is for you. Because Bhagavad Gita is not meant for those who are going to have very few years left. The Bhagavad Gita is meant for people who are going to live life ahead of them. You see the difference between the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavad Gita is a book where Krishna is teaching Arjuna how to live life. Whereas if you see the Bhagavatam is about how to face death. Because Parikshit has now got 7 days left to live. So he wants to know how he should spend these 7 days. Because he's condemned to death by a curse. So Bhagavad Gita is for how to live life. Bhagavatam is for those who have to learn to face death. So the older people should perhaps be reading more of Bhagavad, and the younger people should be reading more of Bhagavad Gita. When do you start reading Bhagavad Gita? See, Krishna says, Chaturvidha bhajante mam jana sukritino Arjuna, artho artharthi jignasur jnani cha varata sabha. There are 4 types of people who come to Krishna. One who is in distress, one who desires wealth, one who is inquisitive or curious, and one who is in knowledge and knows that Krishna is God. Most people I have met and I have seen who have seriously taken to Bhagavad Gita are people who have gone through trouble and strife and suffering. So when things don't turn out or life doesn't turn out the way you want it to, and things seem to be going wrong, and you are suffering and your mind is giving you no rest, that's the time when you pick up Bhagavad Gita, because then you can take the study of Bhagavad Gita seriously. And then you can learn how to transcend suffering at an early age. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And the second question is that is the is related to the topic of today's session, that why understanding the Bhagavad Gita is so difficult. So the next question is, how can one, understand it better? What are the steps to understand, read it, and understand it in a better way?
See, the first step towards understanding Bhagavad Gita is to accept that Krishna is God. Right? It's not about reading Sanskrit or learning Sanskrit, though many people propound that why don't you read Sanskrit, then you'll understand Bhagavad Gita. It is understanding that Krishna is God and being devoted to Krishna. Even Adi Shankaracharya in his Moha Mudgara Stotra points out, भज गोविंदम गोविंदम भज मूढ़मते संप्राप्ते सन्निहिते काले nahi nahi rakshati dukrina karane. Don't waste your time learning Sanskrit grammar. Worship Govind, worship Govind, worship Govind. So learn to worship Govind, learn to worship Krishna, learn to make Krishna your friend, learn to make Krishna the object of your worship. Have an intimate relationship with him so that you can continuously communicate with him. And you will find that if you keep talking to him, he will talk to you also. And then even if you didn't have faith in the beginning, when he speaks to you, you will have faith. And he will act in your life if you pay attention to him. So the path is to remember God and forget self.
Thank you so much, Shantanu ji, for today's session. And people who liked watching it, please do not forget to like and share this video. And do stay in touch with us for the next session, which will happen on next Thursday at 8 a.m. Namaste.
Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.